Hi, guys, and welcome to the War Story podcast. Very pleased to bring you another fantastic guest today. But before we get into that, this is the bit where I ask you to share the podcast if you found something valuable in it, if you found the stories interesting, and I know you will. You wouldn't be here. So yeah, all we ask, guys, is a share. You can do that in multiple ways. You can do it social media. You can find on the podcast app that you're listening to a share button on there. You can text it directly to a friend. Please try and bring us one new listener for every episode that we listen to. I can see that some of you guys have been doing that, which is fantastic because when I look at the numbers, can see that those are going up. So thank you to everyone who's doing that. Takes 2 minutes, if that, probably not. Depends how good you are on your tech side of things, but please do keep doing it. And if you have been doing it, keep doing it. Also, if you could leave a review on Apple, on the Apple Podcasts, that helps a lot. It boosts the algorithm. More people see it. That brings more people in. If you could leave a rating on Spotify if you listen on there, that brings people in. So if you could take 2 minutes, guys, even during listening to the podcast or whatever you are, probably not driving, any other place, please do take 2 minutes and share the pod. Now, without further ado, say hello to today's guest. Loz, how are you doing, mate? Good to have you on.
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I'm looking forward to this conversation, mate. And we are going to, as we were just saying before we got on, nerd out a little bit at the end with our shared love of World War II history. But done a fair bit of scrapping yourself, it is fair to say. So there's so much to dive into. So for those of you listening, it would take an entire book and more to do justice to Loz's military to career. So we're going to kind of pick out a couple of the points just to kind of run down the list here. It starts with Telic 4 at Simic House, very famous battle from the Iraq War, Afghans in here, and spanning many years of war in different theatres of war. So I suppose the first question is, mate, what drew you towards being an infantry soldier in the first place?
So I was probably that generation of guys that sort of joined up straight after 9/11. I got in from secondary school, walked in, watched it on the news, and I think the very next weekend I went down the career centre in Wembley and joined up. So it was one of them things, wasn't it? The old global war on terrorism, and everyone sort of banding together and going, yeah, I want a bit of this.
Well, I've had that answer a lot from Americans. I think that's the first time I've had it that directly from a British person, because, you know, there might be over years that they've seen it in the news, etc. But to have that kind of that quick reaction, almost like a World War II thing where people would go down to the stations. Where did that come from? Was it a sense of adventure, or was that a sense of duty that had been instilled in you? Where did it come from?
I think so. I mean, I've always loved history, and obviously we get into that later. But I think because when I was younger, I used to sort of study history and especially military history, and you know the old World War I guys and World War II guys, you know, signing up to fight for their country. I think it was the same sort of effect mentally in myself as well. 9/11 happened, and that was that spark that made me go, do you know what? That's it. I'm signing up. I'm going to go and fight. And I think everyone knew it was coming as soon as that happened. So, yeah, it was off down the career centre and sign up for the infantry as quick as possible.
Right. And then PWR then, would that be your local regiment?
Yeah, it was. So I was born and raised in North London. So my local regiments would have been PWRR, Princess Wales Royal Regiment, and some of the Guards regiments. And Wembley was a key PWRR recruiting ground. So when I went into the careers office and I met the PWRR recruiting sergeant, that was it. Straight in, straight signed up for the Tigers, 1st Battalion.
So when you join, do you have a choice of battalion, or is it just needs of the regiment?
Well, at that time you did. You sort of went into careers office and said where you wanted to go, and then you did your test to find out if you were either dumb enough to go with the infantry or clever enough to go somewhere else.
Sorry, mate. I meant between, because you had two battalions in the PWR at the time, didn't you?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, at that time it was a choice. It was a choice whether you want to go first or second. So
Yes.
I didn't think manpower was an issue then. And so I sort of walked into the careers office and they said, what battalion do you want to be? And I said, well, what do they offer? And one at the time was Saxon mechanized, and the other one was Warrior, which was 3rd Battalion. And I saw a video of a Warrior just blasting things into oblivion. So I was like, yeah, I'll have some of that, please, mate.
Yeah, sexy machines. So what year would it have been then that you kind of came out of training and joined the battalion?
So I sort of come out because I was quite young when I joined. I had to go to Basenbourne for phase 1, which was sort of like the beginning of 2002. And I went through Basenbourne, then to ITC. And by that time, it was beginning, like the start of 2003, that I sort of got to Tidworth, 1st Battalion, as a young crowbag, straight into A Company. So, by then Telic had kicked off, and we watched it on the news and it all happened. And I think everyone was gagging to get some. They were like, oh, we're an armoured battalion. Why can't we get out there and get a bit? And then I think it was about 6 months later that then we were told we were going. So it weren't long before we were deployed.
How would you kind of describe the culture or the identity of 1 PWRR at the time?
I think at the time it was recognised as a good battalion. It had a very good history, and I know a lot of battalions live off their history. And 1 PWRR always or PWRR as a whole, pride themselves as one of the long forbearing regiments and a lot of battle honours, especially Victoria Crosses winners. So it was a very proud regiment, a very rigid regiment, I will say, compared to some of the regiments I've served with later on. But yeah, it was good. But I think they were a lot of the older lads, especially coming in as a new guy then, a lot of the older lads had been to sort of Northern Ireland and Kosovo. And that was it. That was it. There wasn't really much anyone had done. So Iraq was a whole new ballgame.
Well, let's talk about you and your battalion adding to that history then, the current battalion. Excuse me. When you got out to Iraq then, this would have been around springtime 2004, is it? Telic 4?
Yeah, so it was April to November 2004.
How did you, like, where were you sent to in Iraq, and how did you find the environment when you first got there?
So I was deployed as a young rifleman in A Company, and A Company was sent out as like the Force Reserve company. So we went straight to Basra, was our starting point after our OSOI and everything like that, and sort of acclimatization. We went to Basra, and we started in sort of Basra Palace, and the other companies sort of spread out around the AO. So you had C Company up in Alamara, Y Company, which was a support company with the famous guys at CIMIC, and then you had B Company in Basra as well. And it seemed to be quiet at first, like not much was happening. When we got there, it was kind of all get ready, it's going to be a bit punchy. But when we got there, it was very quiet and nothing much was going on. But then that soon all changed. And my first patrol, I was sent out in a Land Rover to the QRF of a car bomb, and it was carnage. It was recruiting at police stations for coppers and the market day, and someone had gone and blown themselves up in the middle of it. So I was a young 18-year-old lad, turned up to this car bomb site, and it was just horrific. It was just people dead everywhere. There were body parts, there were burning cars. It was just the absolute, and that was the first wake up call I had. And then lo and behold, the whole tour turned into absolute carnage. So
can you talk that day with the car bombing then? Can you talk me through then as a young lad, how are you dealing with what you're seeing yourself, and how are your NCOs ensuring, like, so how are they getting a grip with you to kind of make sure that you as a young lad and maybe your fellow young lads are at dealing with that? Because that's a hell of a thing to come into the first part of your
Y-
first tour. I mean, some people
Yeah.
thankfully never see that in a
Mm.
career, and to get that straight off the bat, I mean, that's a big burden on yourself and also on the leadership.
Yeah, and I think no one was prepared for it. We sort of rocked up into this chaos in Land Rovers that all they had for protection was chicken wire and stuff around them to stop stones and rocks getting thrown in, and especially grenades. And we sort of rocked up in these Land Rovers, and even the senior NCOs looked like they had seen a ghost. It was that chaotic and that disturbing, should we say, with what we were seeing. But I mean, the training kicks in, as we know, as soldiers, the training kicks in, and the NCOs sort of shouting, screaming, and telling people where to go. And then we had to set up a perimeter, and I ended up, looking down a road to secure this area that was undergoing the QRF. But I think the one thing that would always, as an 18-year-old kid at that time, the one thing that would always haunt me was the fact that I was there, with my crow cannon looking down the street. But if I turned my head to my right, and there was a small little girl in a little bundle, and I didn't know it was a little girl at the time. It was just a little bundle of cloth at the side of this corner of this building. And I sort of wandered over, being a curious soldier, and I sort of pulled the cloth away, and it was a little face in there, and it was just, she could have been sleeping. It was just that, but she'd been killed by the shockwave of the blast and sort of crumpled by this wall. And I sort of turned to one of my NCOs and said, "What do I do?" And he said, "There's nothing you can do. There's just literally nothing you can do. You've just got to watch your arcs and let people deal with this." So it was hard to digest at the time because there was nothing I could do. Absolutely nothing.
Obviously, the reason us as soldiers are out there is to help the people of Iraq. Having that experience at the beginning, how did that change, if it did, the way that you saw the locals? Like, did you feel like you had to harden yourself, or did it make you a lot more sympathetic to the locals? Like, what was that kind of shot that your own kind of like changes in behavior, if there was any, to how you saw the locals?
It made me become very wary. You very much didn't know who to trust. The kids were always trying to thieve off you. The teenagers were always trying to get into your vehicles and cause chaos. The adults, you didn't know if they were concealing weapons. And especially as it got late, like sort of after that and mid to late in the tour, when it just, the fighting got more kinetic. Every day you were going around just thinking, I can't trust anybody, not one person, which is sad, really, because you're there to, like you said, you're there to help people. But the riots and the social sort of aggression towards you on the street, and the stones and the feces getting thrown at you, it hardened you to the fact that actually, well, why I'm here, I don't trust any of you.
What was the impetus for this rise in violence that summer?
From the intelligence reports, it was the Mahdi army at the time, who were the main aggressive force who we were up against, were causing the social upheaval. They were spreading their propaganda. They were organizing riots. They were the ones organizing ambushes, and they were the ones who were of the kinetic battles with us mainly. So I think it was just the fact that they were pushing across their agenda, which caused a lot of the stuff that happened on our tour, but also the fact that they just weren't, the people weren't happy. They'd just been invaded. The medical supplies were low, that food was expensive, fuel was expensive, water was expensive. And once prices rise and you're already a poor people start to get angry. And that sort of, hot summer, and people start to become more and more aggressive. So yeah, it was a mixture of things. It was not only an aggressive force causing us to scrap all the time. It was also the fact that the population were becoming unhappy with the state of affairs.
And you mentioned like using the Land Rovers. Were you trying to be as soft a posture as possible on
Yeah,
this early
yeah,
stage at all?
yeah. We were, and that's the reason they started pushing us into Basra in Land Rovers. But that soon, we soon learned that was such a bad idea. We were just going to get casualties if we continued this, and then we ended up just going everywhere in Warrior after that. Land Rovers we kind of used for like night patrols where we owned the night, especially when we went up to Alamara and we did mortar base plate patrols to try and cut down on the amount of IDF we were taking. We used to take the Land Rovers out, hard stop somewhere, and then patrol out on foot because less noise. But the Warrior was kind of, after the first month there, the Warrior became the battle taxi of the whole tour.
The threats of that period, presumably there's myriad threats, but what were if you had to kind of rank them in terms of what the different threats were to you at that time, IED, small arms and so forth, what would you say it was?
It was definitely the threats were definitely between small arms and IDF at that time. IEDs were very rare on Telic 4. I actually never experienced anything to do with IEDs on Telic 4. There were other incidences, but they were very rare. But most of all the contacts that I was engaged in were small arms, or we were taking IDF. Compared to my latter tours, which Telic 6 and 8, there was more IEDs than there was small arms engagements. But definitely on Telic 4, it was definitely small arms and IDF, which were the main.
Can you talk us through the first time that you came into small arms fire then?
Yeah, so the first time I came into small arms was in Basra. So we went out on a patrol in Land Rovers, and we sort of went down a street with he was a very young platoon commander at the time, and he sort of got us lost. Standard, you can't really write it, but he got us lost, and we went down a back alley, and we took it. We sort of run into an ambush, small arms ambush, and I think everyone remembers their first crack and thump experience. That hard cracking sound of an AK or a PKM going off, and that sort of whip crack as it goes past you. And I think that was a massive wake up call to me. Not only experiencing a car bomb, but that coming under the intense fire from an AKs and PKMs, and then followed on by a whoosh and a crash of an RPG. I think I didn't know what to do. Like, I will be honest, and I think a lot of guys who come onto their first contact, I wasn't scared. I just was confused, because contacts are always confusing things. But I think the adrenaline was so pumped up, my fear left me. But I was very confused about what was going on. It was very disorientating, because we were in Land Rovers, we were driving down an alleyway, and this happened. So I think the confusion outweighed the fear. But I definitely will always remember that first crack and thump, and the whoosh of an RPG going across. It kind of makes it like a ripping of paper as it goes over the top of you. And yeah, that sort of blew my mind as a young 18-year-old Tom, sitting in the back of a Land Rover. And I managed to fire a few rounds off from my LSW, but that was it. Like, it wasn't like a magical event that you see in the movies. It was literally, must have been about 70 seconds of fire before it was all over and we were out there. So yeah, it wasn't anything special, but I will always remember it for it being my first kind of contact.
And the similar kind of thing, can you remember the first time where you got a good look at, because you might think, oh, there's someone moving over there, could that be them? Can you remember the first time where you saw someone like, yeah, that's the fucking enemy?
Yeah. So when we were in Alamara, we took part in a big operation called Op Waterloo. Now that was the push into Alamara and relieve Simic House, which was under siege at the time. And this was a full combined arms assault into a city. Like, that hadn't been done since the actual Telic invasion. And I remember it as vivid as I was there yesterday. But we were dismounted at night, pushing into Alamara, and we had a Challenger 2 in front of us rumbling down the street. And it was something out of the Second World War, because it's like following tanks and you're going down the sides, like clearing the alleyways. And then you had warriors following on behind and you were sort of flanking them. And we were sort of pushing it. It was completely empty. There was no sound. And then we got engaged from a building. Second story, PKM goes off, tracer bounces all over the road, misses 4 or 5 of us. The Charlie barrel sort of goes up, looks, and then next thing you know, a Hesh round goes in through the window and the whole thing explodes. And you're just thinking, fucking hell, man. Like, that's all you can do. And I sort of looked right and I saw a guy sort of run down the alley. And next thing, there was a muzzle flash. And I was like, fucking, there you are, prick. There's another one. So, give a burst with the LSW. And, it's confusing. There is no way I can go, yeah, I got him. He was dead. But I wouldn't know, because it was so quick. There was just a guy there, a burst, and he's gone. I fire back. And then you're on to the next muzzle flash, which happens in a building 2 stories down from the next one. So, but I always remember there was someone there, because you could see him, you saw him run, and then you saw the muzzle flash, and then he sort of darted into another kit. But that was Iraq. There were so many alleys, there were so many hideaways and buildings at that. It's very hard to sort of go, yeah, that's the guy, that's the guy, that's the shooter, compared to sort of Afghan, where it was so close. And you were sort of dropping guys in front of you, and you're like, well, yep, that's one, that's another. But Iraq was so much different. It's just so quick, and they could get away so quickly.
So you obviously mentioned Alamara there. I'd love to come back onto a bit more about Op Waterloo as well. What could you talk us through the reasons then that you were pulled out of Basra and sent up to Alamara? What was going on in the is it town or a city, Alamara?
It's a city, yeah. Alamara is a city, yeah. So basically, C Company and Y Company were based at Camp Abinaji up near Alamara, and they were getting increasingly, I wouldn't say mauled, but Simic House were becoming cut off. They were under siege. C Company were finding themselves overstretched with the amount, because it's a whole city and you've got a company there with a squadron of tanks, basically, trying to hold this city. And in the end, they were kicked out. So the company were kicked out back to Camp Abinaji, which was an old Iraqi army base just on the outskirts of town. And the contingent of Y Company was stuck inside the town at Simic House. So the whole of A Company were mobilized with all their warriors up to support C Company. So then this big op happened, Op Waterloo, which was the offensive to push back in and take Alamara and release Simic House. And I think any veteran of that sort of op will remember the CO speech about how, not all of you will be coming back from this, sort of. And I remember them putting body bags into the back of the warriors. And I was just like, fuck. What's he mean by that? So we ended up sort of doing this night assault into the city. And like I said, it turned into a very much a sporadic gunfights here and there, the odd tank firing, the odd warrior giving a burst. And then we managed to get all the way to Simic House and relieve Simic House. Which then turned into sort of 4 or 5 days of running battles with the Mahdi army, which involved us surrounding Simic House with warriors and defending Simic House with them. Because once we'd pushed into the city, they very much wanted it back, because they saw it as a great dishonor that we'd managed to kick them back out again. So it become, not only was the op sort of meant to be 1 day of clear the city, it then turned into about 4 or 5 days of fighting after that.
18-year-old lad putting body bags in the back of your truck. Is there any part of you that thinks I'm going in one of those, or have you got that confidence of youth where it's not going to be me? I don't know what's going through your head.
I think at that time, because my very varied career, at that time, yes, I thought, that won't be me. I won't end up in one of them bags. That'll be somebody else. But later on in my career, it kind of, I think it was the sort of moving later down that ideal changed. I sort of kind of come to terms with, actually, I may not walk away from any of this anymore. I don't really care anymore. But that time as an 18-year-old lad on my first tour, I was like, nah, that ain't me. It's going to be someone else. Definitely someone else.
Once you've got up there then, and you've now surrounded this Cynic house and a ring of steel of warriors and challengers, the Mahdi army is still coming at you. I mean, they don't have warriors or challenger tanks, right? So, I mean, are these almost like suicidal human wave attacks? I mean, what are the enemy tactics like?
No, they were pretty good. They knew what to do. They knew to wait in alleys as soon as our warriors, and a company, foolishly enough, on the side of our warriors, we had triangles with the number of the sort of platoon you were. So each one had their own tack marking, which was a triangle. Now, foolishly enough, these were on every vehicles, whether you were C company or B company. The Taliban used to use them as aiming markers for their RPGs. So it was like center of mass, right in the middle of Chobham armor, hit them there. So they knew what to do. They used to wait in alleyways, and then as you come across, they used to fire straight away. Boom, hit the side of the warrior. And the amount of times I used to watch RPGs wang into the side of warriors, and how the hell we kept taking the punishment, I do not know. Like, I've got a friend of mine, Griff. I've always a famous picture he's got of his warrior he was driving, and there's a massive, great big hole in the side where SPG-9 went straight through it and into the fuel tank. And I remember the blokes in the back saying that they looked, and the fuel tank, obviously in the warriors in the middle, they watched the slug of the SPG glowing in the fuel tank, just glowing, where it just gone in. And so, they were very good at hiding up, waiting for vehicles to come and then hit them. Summit House was a little bit different. It was all opportunist stuff. They sort of come out of alleyways, fire an RPG, and then sort of duck back in. But they were very good at using, a bit like the Taliban and Afghan, they were very good at using their surroundings, and they knew the place very well. So we were strangers in their city. So they were able to sort of cut around, move around. They were firing mortars from their back gardens. It was very hard to sort of pinpoint them, track them, and then follow up on them.
Yeah, I mean, this might not be a question that you answer. Maybe you got it kind of given an idea at some point. Are these local blokes who have kind of like local militias who live in the town, grew up in the town, or have these been bussed in from other places?
It's a mix. It was a mix. The intelligence reports were always, it was a mix of guys. So it would be like foreign fighters mixed in with people who knew the terrain. So like they would have a chain of command. Like the local guys would command groups of foreign fighters, and then they would sort of put them on target, tell them where to go. And so having that knowledge from a commander made them very good at being able to cut around the battlefield or the battle space and take us on. And the sort of the ability to say, we were killing them was never there, because you'd kill one or two and you'd see one or two of them die, but that's one or two. There was more in a group that would come and take you on. There'd be about 10 or 11, but you're killing one or two of them, and they're causing casualties on you and taking out equipment. That they were definitely winning the battle space compared to what we were doing. So it was a very unfair advantage in the fact that although we had warriors, we had air support, we had all this technological advantage, yet guys running around with RPGs and AKs just because they knew the local area was very much to our disadvantage.
What kind of was there any kind of ability, like in Afghan you had the icon that you kind of listen into the enemy's radio chatter, have interpreters, get an idea of if they're setting up an ambush, maybe how many casualties it took? Was there anything like that on Telic 4?
No, I think it was sort of a concept that was sort of coming in, but I never in our company we never had that. We never had that capability. It was always intelligence from locals that we were relying on, and that was sketchy at most. Like we'd rely. I remember being on guard at Avinaji camp when we were up there doing our rotation, when we weren't trying to duck away from IDF. We would sit there and wait for walk-ins, like someone to come in for money, for information, and that's the sort of intelligence we were relying on. Is someone to come in with some gen that would go, oh yeah, they're sort of setting up a mortar in my back garden. They'll be there at 10 o'clock tonight. Come and have a go at them if you want. But it's very rare that happened. So the intelligence was always very sketchy. It always seemed to come in from somewhere, and we believe that was more from stuff the special forces was getting than what we were getting.
What about was there an estimate of the strength of the Mahdi army in Al-Mar at the time?
I definitely think it was in the hundreds. Definitely a very sizable force. If anything, they were probably up to about a company plus in strength by far, because the amount of damage they were doing.
And so would they attack in the day and then pull away somewhere deep in the city at night, let the woos kind of come back their turn, or is this a 24-hour day thing?
They'd still take you on at night. If they thought the advantage was there, it was rarer, but they would still take you on at night, and we still had night contacts. Tracer whizzing around like it's Star Wars. But I think mostly at night they used to use the element of surprise with the IDF, and sort of set up in people's back gardens, fire at Abinaji camp, fire at Simic house, and then sort of dissipate back into the sort of night. Because we used to do a lot of sort of night ops we used to call them Op Bayswater, which was sort of go round Abinaji where the old airfield is, and then into the shit pits and the rubbish tip outside the city, sort of set up ambushes, wait for mortar teams to come out. But night fighting was rare unless we were doing a big op. They used to more take us on at daytime because they had more chance of hitting us in daytime. Seeing a British soldier standing at a roadblock was easier to hit than sort of hitting them at night time.
You mentioned the IDF. How good were their mortar teams?
Oh, very good. We used to laugh because we used to have my accommodation at Abinaji was an ISO container with another ISO container on top of it, full of sand.
Fuck yeah.
And the Scoff house used to be at the other end of site, the other end of the camp. And we used to put a body armor and helmet on, and then as we started walking, you hear dum, dum, and it come into sight, and all you do is sort of crouch and hold your helmet and go, right, hang on, right, that's two, yep, carry on. But they'd all be inside sight or just on the perimeter. They were very good at then. Most of them were probably ex Iraqi army, so they probably had training in how to fire these weapon systems, and they weren't just like one or two on occasions. It'd be 6, 7, 8. On other occasions, you could probably get one day and then maybe 8 on another day, depending how brave they were feeling at the time.
And what's the rules of engagement for something like that? Could your own mortar platoon, basically, if you saw a base plate, could your own mortar platoon put down a barrage, or was it quite a lot of rules of engagement in place for limiting civilian casualties?
Yeah, our hands were tied in a lot of occasions. I know the mortar platoon were very active at night time with illumination. So there's famous pictures from Abinaji camp with the mortar platoon firing at night, and they got the flash and the guys either side of the mortar barrel, but they were mostly firing illumination to try and illuminate the base plate areas for the patrols, because these guys were clever. They were like, well, do you know what? If we fire them in people's back gardens, they can't drop an airstrike on us because they'd blow up the house and kill the civvies inside. So they weren't stupid. They were like, let's make sure we're as close as possible to civilian infrastructure, so they can't retaliate with heavy ordnance.
And how did you feel, both yourself individually and as a group, about the rules of engagement that you were on?
We were okay with them. I mean, the type of fighting in Iraq was so sporadic. If someone was gonna take a shot at you, and you knew the general area of where that round come from, you'd fire back. And usually the civvies would bug out anyway before the contact started. Usually, there were a lot of times they didn't, and it would be an opportunist attack on us, even though there was other civvies in the area. But usually there'd be that combat indicator of, actually, was it so quiet around here? And then all of a sudden you get hit. So you kind of didn't worry where your rounds were going, especially in Iraq, where the walls of the houses were quite high, and you didn't have the fear of going into people's front windows or bedrooms or anything. It was, confined alleyways. And we had a scrap up in an alleyway, And one of my section commanders at the time fired a UGL, and it went straight into a carpet shop and set it on fire. Which, so, and then it's like a scene in Fury where the Germans come out on fire, running around, and they're sort of like running out on fire, and you're sort of putting them down as they're coming out. So it's sort of like, but
I thought so they were actually using the carpet shop as the firing point.
As the firing point, yeah. Right. So
great shot.
It was really good shot, and sort of like. Or like I was standing and I sort of turned and fired around the corner. All I heard was like dunk behind me, and it sort of like you can see him like a little black dot going through the air, and it landed straight in the carpet shop, and the whole thing went up. And you're just thinking, that's a bloody good shot. That
fair play, UGL sniper. How often were you initiating contact compared to the enemy initiating it?
On my tour, they were always initiating it. We were always the ones who were getting the good news, never us giving the good news to them. That changed later on in my career when I did some tasty stuff and we ended up ambushing the enemy. But on that tour, it was pretty much we wait until we got our asses handed to us. From my experience from a company, there'd be other companies who had different experiences, like especially the guys from Y Company who were actually on the rooftops at Simic and Pink Palace who were, sniping guys before they had a chance to fire. But for us, we were like the rifle company bullet magnets going out. And I think that in the end, that's what pushed me towards going something specialist rather than being that rifle Tom that's just going to go out and get shot. So,
well, that's kind of what I was going to say, mate, is like, what kind of effect does that have on you for constantly being on the receiving end of a quote unquote slap rather than, not to say that you don't give one back, but, but to feel like that initiative has been maybe taken away.
But yeah, I think that Telic 4 was massively a major factor of where my career went after that. I enjoyed the tour because it was what I joined to do. It was to go and fight the enemy. But it wasn't how I wanted to fight the enemy. I was thinking, hang on, I want to be able to close with and kill the enemy, not go out, walk about, get shot at and die in some shithole because I'm just here to do a job, like stand at a roadblock and guard it for 12 hours and wait to be suicide bombed or shot by a sniper. So sort of that pushed me to go towards recce. Because I thought, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to go out and find them. I'm going to be able to control the battle space with the information I gain and then share that with a battalion for good effect. So yeah, Telic 4 was very much the basis on why I went to do specialist role rather than just carry on in a rifle company.
And just one before we kind of wrap up on Telic 4, mate. Just talk a bit about the climatic conditions and the difficulties of that.
Yes, I mean anyone who went to Iraq will remember being inside an armored vehicle with no aircon, completely buttoned down in the Iraqi summer. Absolutely getting out soaked head to toe. I must have lost. I was only a skinny little 18-year-old anyway, but I come back looking awful. I'd lost so much weight from just like fluids because it was just so hot every day. And it wasn't like Afghan where it was like a humid hot. It was a dry baking hot that used to just cook you. It was just something completely different. I mean, you did acclimatize to it, and anyone who's been to them theatres knows that after a while you do kind of get used to it. But when you're sitting inside an armoured vehicle and a warrior with just literally nothing but water, there were times blokes were just piling in the back and just sort of falling unconscious, and you sort of had to just leave them. There's nothing you could do. You had to sit inside this warrior on a checkpoint and just wait for it. So hard times.
And presumably, because you're in a built-up area, you can't have any of the hatches open even or anything like that.
No. Sadly, we learned that the hard way with the loss of Leo Callahan and the fact that, he was at the top on the mortar hatch of a warrior. So if anyone knows the warrior very well, it knows you got the turret, and then behind that, you got the top hatch of a warrior where you can sort of get two guys out facing left and right. And Lee was killed when he took a round from being in that position. So after that happened, it was close the hatches, no one up. So you learn from your lessons.
Was there many casualties sustained by the battalion on that tour?
We were very lucky for what we were doing. We suffered 2 deaths, and one was an accident, which was Chris Raymond. So it was hard to lose 2 guys, but at the same time, for what happened on that tour, we were incredibly lucky to not have more. There were other units taking casualties, but for us in what we were doing to only take 2 deaths, and I mean, it's not right to take any deaths, but to take 2 out of the amount of kinetic war fighting that was taking place was probably a testament to how well the battalion did on that tour. So yeah, definitely could have been a lot worse.
So I want to kind of just ask a bit of a more non-specific tour question, I guess. But you have an interest in history and everything like that. You've just been through this historic event in itself in Iraq. Did you find when you were soldiering in this period, and we can talk maybe about later ones as well, would you compare your experiences? Like you actually kind of mentioned the walking down behind the tank. Did you find yourself flicking in your mind a lot to, oh, this is like this, of that I read about or that I learned about, and compare your experiences to your too?
Not at the time. So sort of like not at the time when you're actually there. But when I got home after the tour and I was sort of decompressing from it all, I sort of, the way I coped with it was my history and my interest of history. And I think that's when I sort of compared stuff. And I said, oh, and there's the famous picture of the Normandy invasion, and you got the Sherman DDs going down the road, and you got the Commando brigade behind them, and they're following on. And I always remember seeing that picture and thinking that looked just like when we were going down that street on Op Waterloo, but it was a Charlie, and there was us sort of like going down the road towards the multi-story. And so that it did happen. And I think, my history with looking into not only the Second World War, but things like Palestine and stuff like that, it all sort of like, oh, so this is what they must have gone through in them theatres at the time.
And how does that make you feel then as a young bloke and a soldier when you realise that you've had some similar experiences to that kind of generation?
I mean, it gives you that warrior spirit. And every warrior wants to be like the past warriors that have gone before them. And I think the more you did, and that's, moving on to my sins of, becoming addicted to combat, is that, I wanted more. I wanted to prove myself more. I wanted to get back under fire and do more of it. And I think that whole warrior spirit is the fact that, I need to prove myself again and again and again, even though you don't. If you've been in combat, you've been in combat. You don't need to prove it to anyone after that. But sometimes you can't let go, and hence why I started doing more and more tours, is because I wanted to get back out there and prove that I could do more and more. And I think that all sort of merged with the history thing. I think I want to do what they did, and I want to be able to say that I did what they did.
Where does the warrior spirit come from in this certain percentage of people every generation, it seems?
I think it's a mix of things, isn't it? Patriotism to your country, want to serve your country, want to be recognized for what your achievements are, more for, combat and where you've been. Because, as a soldier, when you join the infantry, you don't want to join the infantry and do nothing. You don't want to sit in some shithole somewhere and not do anything. You want to be able to go, I was an infantryman and I did infantryman stuff, and I went to war and fought for my country. And I think when you, especially when I moved from the rifle company to recce, there was always that aspiration to do more, to be able to say that we went and done this, we were involved in this. And I think that whole ethos and warrior spirit is team orientated as well, not only as an individual, but as a team. Because anyone who served in a specialist platoon, whether it's anti-tanks, mortars, recce, snipers, you become a bond of people who just want to achieve more and more and more and more and be recognized for what they've done. So I think as a soldier, when you go through your career, that warrior spirit, especially infantry guys, becomes embedded in you. especially in training where you're being trained to go out and kill.
You kind of mentioned the history, but I mean, a big part of patriotism is based on history, right? It's the pride in what the generations in your country has done before you came along. So it's kind of interesting that you being, I'm just kind of like trying to think through it in my mind that the way that maybe the more you know about history, and that, like, for instance, the Paras, their regimental ethos is incredible, and a lot of it is based on what they did at D-Day, what they did at Arnhem, what they did at Goose Green. And I think yeah, that's it's an interesting way of putting it. It's one of the things I always think about now. We had a guest on recently, Ethan Nagel, and it's kind of what I think of now as the Black Hawk Down question: is why is it some people will go in the cinema or put on the TV and watch Black Hawk Down and go, oh, that was a cool film, and then other people will go, right, I'm off down to the recruiting office. Fascinating to know what that is that pulls people out. And then maybe that's what we're just saying, is maybe a big part of it is that understanding of history and then wanting to match it. So yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud there. So you mentioned that you wanted to kind of just keep scratching the itch, so to speak. So when was it that you started to make these changes in your career path to facilitate that?
It was not long. So when we returned from Telic 4, the battalion got posted out to Germany, 20 Armoured Brigade, literally as soon as we sort of recovered. And I was lucky, if I'm honest. I started applying for support company. And then I was offered the chance to go away and do the tactical, which was a new concept to the British Army at the time, which was the tactical tactical satellite communicators course. And it was the ability at the time was not only to communicate with the tactical satellite, but to talk to airframes, because there wasn't enough forward air controllers. And I thought, that's cool. I can call in and talk to airframes, and if I need to help drop something on someone, then I can help drop something on someone. So I went away and I went back to the UK and I did the tactical satellite operators course, and that was like a 5 to 6 weeks course in Bicester, and then I come back, and then everyone wanted me. Once I had that qualification, I didn't know what hit me. I was being pulled pillar to post for people to use me for different things. And I was called into the company office, and they said, they've got a lack of operators in Iraq. Do you want to go back? I said, yeah, I'll go back. It said 12 Brigade are deploying in the summer. You'll go with their HQ and you'll be supporting their Brigade Reconnaissance Force. Or it wasn't the Brigade Reconnaissance Force at the time. It was just the Brigade Reconnaissance Group. And yeah, so I ended up not only getting back, doing my post-tour leave, everything like that. I ended up doing a course and then mobilizing, doing pre-deployment training and going straight back out again, literally after being back for about 4 months. So it was flush to bang. So I was pretty lucky, really. For someone who wanted to scratch that itch, I got the ability to scratch it straight away. A lot of people didn't get to do that. So I left the battalion for a little bit, and I did Telic 6 with 12 Brigade HQ, which was an interesting one, because not being involved with a rifle company and just being pushed out to different elements of the brigade, working with different units, which was interesting. You were sort of respected for your trade because you could give their support if needed, or you could talk to get them out of the shit if they were doing patrols along near Iran or anything like that. So it was an interesting tour, but it wasn't as kinetic as I thought it was going to be. For some reason, it had, since our tour, quieted down quite a bit. And I probably only fired my weapon 2 or 3 times on that tour, which was kind of a shock, really. And I was a bit like, okay. I thought it was going to be a bit more than this, especially after the last tour I just did. But I enjoyed it, and the brigade, working with the brigade and the reconnaissance group, was good. But it wasn't as feisty as I thought it was going to be. It was a bit mundane for my taste after such a kinetic tour on 4. So then I got back and then returned back to 1 PWRR and straight into recce platoon. So
And then you went out, what, about another 6 months after that? You went back out again?
Yeah, with Telic 8, and this time it was a bit more feisty. So on Telic 8, I was part of the reconnaissance platoon in which we were doing helicopter interdiction, which was basically using a Merlin helicopter, finding a target, landing down next to it, and taking prisoners, high value targets, or doing raids into the city of Basra. So it was a bit more feisty, a bit more my cup of tea, and we did get into a bit of a scrap in a raid, which was quite interesting. One of the guys got mentioned in dispatches for that. But also, I sadly was involved, and I was one of the first guys on the scene for the Lynx crash in the city when it was shot down.
Yeah.
So,
do you mind talking through it, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no. So I was kind of sitting on my bed in the APOD at the time, and got this call, QRF to deploy. Loz, you need to go out with the TACSAT. Got to get out there. So we sort of rushed out, and we got to the crash site because the Lynx had crashed when shot down, and it crashed in the city of Basra. And the Mahdi army, or the remnants of the Mahdi army, were starting to enclose on the crash site. And, the bodies of British soldiers or British airmen would be a prized, bargaining chip. So we had to get out to that. So we were sort of rushed out in sort of any vehicle we could get hold of out to the crash site. I managed to get on the crash site with the first remnants of the QRF. And because I had the TACSAT, I wasn't on the cordon. I was pushed directly into the crash. And yeah, it wasn't great because obviously it landed inside a building, and the bodies were, sadly, they were all dead. And the bodies were not in good condition. And I was part of the team that helped bag them and put them up ready for exfil. And I remember sitting there sending a sit rep on my TACSAT with 5 body bags laid next to me, which was a bit hard to stomach at that time. But yeah, that wasn't a good day. Not a good day at all.
When you went out to that incident, obviously you're an older person, but you're also a more experienced person by then. Did you notice differences in the way that you handled yourself compared to that first time when you had that mass casualty event in Iraq?
Yeah, even though I was at that time, I was probably about 20 or 21. I think I must have been, coming up to 21 at that time, 3 tours in. I was feeling older in myself and more, I would say I felt more confident in myself. When the old crack and thump was coming in, I wasn't ducking. I was sort of looking around and thinking, where the hell did that come from? That confidence to be able to stand taller than the other guys when stuff was going on. And I think that comes with time and experience on the ground. And seeing stuff like that, and bodies and people getting hit or blown up, or going out to an IED incident and seeing British soldiers sprayed in the inside of snatched Land Rovers and stuff, and you kind of become able to block it out and just get on with the job rather than sort of digest it and become sort of stuck in yourself. It wasn't really till I was getting home that was sort of taking its toll. But at the time when I was out there, and you were seeing mass casualty events or IED aftermaths, it wasn't sort of bothering me at the time while I was out there. It was once I was at home and I could sort of get it in my head that, oh shit, that fucking happened.
Because of this TACSAT qualification, then you're kind of a prized commodity, is for want of a better word. So is that meaning that when essentially, if something's bad's happened, they're going to be sending you as bad?
Yes. Yeah, it was a curse and a blessing. I used to call it a curse and a blessing. I got a photo of me in the accommodation. I've got my bag out with my TACSAT, which was my TACSAT signed to me for the whole tour. And I literally, if something was going to happen, whether the recce were going on the ground for a raid or an op, or actually one of the companies was going on a direct op, they'd be like, "Where's Loz? Can you grab Loz? We need him to come out just in case we need comms." Half the time they would never use me because the vehicles have got comms. I was really there if it was recce when they were on the ground and they've been taken out by helicopter, dropped off somewhere remote to go and do a VIP or high target snatch. But usually if I went out with the rifle companies, I wasn't ever needed. I was just sort of with the HQ group, sort of guarding, prisoners or sort of looking after casualties or anything like that. But the real time I was used was when I was a recce.
You were in Iraq on 3 tours. So you went out in 2004, you did your final tour 2006. What differences, if any, are you seeing in Basra in Iraq and you were in Basra in both ends of it as well, in that 2-year period?
It was the way the fighting was taking place from Telic 4 sort of being a kinetic hardline firefight type tour to not very doing much over 6, and then going back on 8, and then mostly being IEDs and IDF, stuff where they didn't want to get into a toe-to-toe fight with us, because by that time they'd learned that there's no point getting into a toe-to-toe fight with the British. You're just going to end up dead. So they learned very quickly that actually it's better go have a toe-to-toe fight with the Americans and then just use IEDs and IDF on the Brits. So I just found through that whole time that it become quiet, but more dangerous from the unknown. Just, they started coming up with anyone who's been to Iraq, especially the later tours, the old PRI devices, where they were using Guard and PRI devices and slughead devices to take out snatch vehicles and armor and stuff. So they were becoming very, very good at what they did. And it's very hard to defeat that. We tried to counter with ECM and, skills and drills that we picked up in Northern Ireland. But they were very good at, working out what we were doing and then going, well, we can go one bit better here and we can do something else.
And how does that make you feel then as an infantry soldier, these kind of tactics, enemy tactics, moving away from the stand-up fight to the IED tactics? And if you had a choice now to be dropped back into one of those tours, which one would you be choosing?
It'd be Telic 4 all time around. If I had to choose an Iraq tour, taken away from Afghan, if I had to choose an Iraq tour to go on, it'd be Telic 4, because you stood toe to toe in more of a fight than the later tours where you didn't know if you were going to drive down the road and get hit by an IED. So I would be dropped into Telic 4 in a heartbeat if I had to be.
So let's talk about this switch to Afghan then, mate. In fact, I do have one more question for you actually on Iraq. Obviously, the next summer was the kind of pull out from Iraq. All the bases got shut down in Basra. There was a pull out from there. As someone who'd invested 18 months of your career there, and dealt with the things that you dealt with, were you aware of what was going on there at the time? And if so, what was your kind of attitude to it?
Do you know what? I'm going to be selfishly honest here and say that after my last tour of Iraq, I lost all interest in Iraq because my new focus was Afghan. Yeah. Because by that time, Afghan, like my last tour of Iraq, Afghan was starting to kick off properly in Helmand. Forgetting the sort of early tours up at Kabul and everything like that. The Helmand province tours were kicking off, and you were starting to get all the reports of what was happening on the Helmand tours. I think, especially being in a recce platoon, you're just like, fuck, really want to get out there and scrap. Want to get out there and do what the lads are doing now. And I think it sounds really bad, but I kind of just went, switch fire. Fuck Iraq. I don't care about Iraq anymore. I've done what I've done out there. I've done 3 tours. Fuck that place. Let me get out to Afghan and let's start doing some damage. And I think that was my mindset. And it sounds bad if I say it now, but at the time, I was gagging for it. I was like, get me out of Afghan. I don't care about Iraq. Get me out of Afghan. So I think like the whole pull out and the whole sort of withdrawal from Iraq, I just lost interest. I didn't follow any of it. I sort of like new focus, war in Afghan, Helmand Province, Green Zone. Get me in there. I want to do some scrapping.
I'm sure there's a lot of people nodding their heads, mate, listening to that. You know, especially for people who've been on Card Alpha, you know,
Yeah.
for several tours, and then they're seeing A10s coming in. It's like, no, you're speaking for a lot of people, I think, there, mate. So your Afghan tours, mate. You deployed on your first one with the Commando Brigade. How did that come about?
So basically, well, back in Germany, 20 Armored Brigade with 1 PWRR. I had become bored of Germany, and I wanted to get back to the UK. So I put in a transfer to go to 1 Royal Anglian. So I put in this transfer to go to 1 Royal Anglian. However, I think it was a couple of days later, Recce Platoon were called into the office in Y Company and said, guys, 3 Commando Brigade are undermanned. Who wants to go to Commando Brigade and help and do the tour? And we were all like, yeah, fucking count us in. We want to go. So, yeah, we ended up as a whole platoon going 3 Commando Brigade and helping out. We did all their pre-deployment training with them. Went to Brecon on a really strange exercise with them, and ended up deploying with them. And
what do you mean by strange exercise?
It was just so bizarre. We'd never known an exercise like it. It was like treating the Brecon beacons as Afghan was just the bizarrest thing I've ever done. It was so bizarre, and trying to drive vehicles over the drop zones and stuff, and then just getting bogged in, and it was just like, what the fuck is going on here? Who thought this was a bright idea? But yeah, so yeah, we end up deploying out and supporting both 4.5 and 4.2 Commando, and it turned into being to one spice. It was a winter tour of all things, and there was all this talk about how winter tours were always going to be quiet and nothing ever happened on a winter tour. It couldn't be anything but different. Like, I've never known anything like it. It was the tastiest. It was one of the tastiest things I've ever done compared to like my later tours. But it was a very offensive tour because it was the Commandos were going to push into Nadi Ali and take Nadi Ali, and that was a massive Taliban stronghold. So the whole tour we spent our time mostly helping the Commandos take Nadi Ali, and the fighting was bitter, absolutely bitter. The casualties were high on both sides, and we called it the blood and the mud because it was raining all the time, but we were scrapping all the time, and there was casualties piling up, and it was something out of the Somme in some places, with guys trudging down ditches and taking compounds at close range, with Taliban everywhere. And I remember one of the battles we had, we sort of were holding this crossroads in CVRT, and the Taliban were just throwing themselves at us, and we were just cutting guys down, like with coax and 30 mil. We had RPG and small rounds bouncing off us, and they just kept coming. They just literally kept coming, and we were just mowing them down. And we were just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, they know they're not going to hit us unless they get really close with an RPG and do some damage. And they just kept. And my boss, who'd already got an MC on Telic 8, he got an MID because he jumped out, because I was his gunner, and he jumped out and said, just crack on, because we had a casualty at the time. One of our lads had been shot, so he was like, I'm jumping out, I'm going to get some help because the comms have gone down, because the weather was that ghastly, all the fucking bowmen broke down. And so he jumped out and run back to the HQ to get a Kazivac. So there's me, like, the fucking boss has just jumped out. I've got Taliban all over the place. So I'm just there trying to just cut guys down as they're coming to try and take these vehicles out. And there's 3 of us sitting there just like rotating our turrets. Guys running across roads, you're firing coax, chopping them in half, 30 mil bouncing up and taking guys' heads off. And it's just like, this is fucking unreal. What the fuck is going on? Like, and the Commandos are sitting there going, that's fucking Ali. Like, just fucking sit. They're in the ditches like either side, not because they can't move because they're pinned down. And it's just if you try to tell people, they wouldn't believe you. they'd be like, that never happened. I was like, I can assure you it did. It was just crazy. And then at one point, the Marines were making an advance on the villages, Shinkele and places like that. And they were using airframes to strafe the trenches in front of them. And then they'd make a push onto the next ditch. And it was like a bit like the Second World War, like advancing on different positions. That you get the air cover come in, strafe the ditch in front of them. They're advanced on that ditch, take it, wait for the next airframe to come in, strafe the next ditch, move forward across a muddy field, take the next ditch. It was just, you couldn't describe it. It was absolute carnage.
What kind of ranges were they getting? Were they when you were engaging with the coax and
Oh, they were the closest they would get was like 10, 20 meters. They
so
were
fucking on you.
Like literally looking through the sight, a BGTI site of a CVRT. Has anyone served in recce, in armored recce as well? And they've looked for a BGI site at that range. You can see all their features.
Okay.
And you're just dropping guys, and 30 mil as well hitting guys at that range. It just literally turns them inside out. It's just nothing left. It's just poof, gone. And
wild. Do you think it is it makes them do that? Is it because I mean I know in they always think of drug use and stuff like what's your kind of theory on what would make a person do that?
Well, a lot of the intelligence from the guys fighting on that winter tour where they were Chechens. So basically they were Chechen Muslims coming over to fight the winter because they used to fight in that sort of climatic environment. And they were coming over. So we were fighting guys who weren't afraid to go up against armor. And they sort of thought, well, if we've got RPGs, we can certainly have a blast. And I think that looking at it, I think a lot of it was desperation as well to hold the village. Like Shinkele, they were desperate to hold that as a sort of like logistics base for them. If you say they would be able to move in and out as a strategic crossroads in Nelly Alley. But yeah, so they a mix of desperation, Chechen foreign fighters, and also being drugged up and pushed out and paid money as well to go and fight us. They get cash in hand, take this AK, go and have a scat with the British. But yeah, it was definitely a strange environment. And we did a raid with 4-5 Commando onto a place called Yellow 10, which I'd end up actually fighting again on my next tour on Herrick 11 with exactly the same crossroads, which was very strange. But we went and did this raid on Yellow 10, and we had our CVRTs with them on that. And we held this compound trying to deny them the use of this crossroads. And they were that desperate to retake this crossroads, they were throwing themselves at the CVRTs. And one of our CVRTs had to shoot the enemy off one of our other CVRTs. So, and there's film footage that one of the lads took from the turret of like literally 30 mil just brassing past one of our other CVRTs while they fired 7.62 around it to stop the guys climbing on the CVRT. So it's
like I just think of that last battle in Saving Private Ryan and stuff.
Yeah,
they're getting up.
But I've tried to say to people that that's the sort of thing happened, and they're like, no, that never happened. That would never happen. But if you talk to the guys who were in my platoon or the Commando guys that were at Yellow 10, they'd tell you that that happened.
Well, we can solve that dilemma right now. Just eyebrows, Janet.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to say? Because I just kind of, like I said, this could be all book and more. So because we're only just scraping the surface of these tours here. But is there anything you want to say about that? Because and we've got a lot more to get into as well.
No, that was a good tour. That was my first Afghan tour, and it couldn't have been a better tour. Everyone says, summer tour. Like I said, summer tours are the best. That was a very scrappy winter tour in my eyes, and I know some winter tours after that were as scrappy. So it was a good eye opener to the Afghan theatre of war. And a lot of the guys in my platoon were veterans of Iraq, Kosovo, Ireland. at that time. So yeah, it was a good tour, and you know, I kind of left that tour on a buzz, got back to unit after leaving the brigade, and they sort of said, you know, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I did put in a transfer to 1 Royal Anglian. They said, okay, you're off to 1 Royal Anglian. And next thing you know, I've been transferred over into 1 Royal Anglian Recce Platoon. Lo and behold, like get there, and then they turn around and go, oh, we're deploying on Herrick 11. Do you want to come with us? And I was like, yes, fucking get me back out. So like, I 23 years old, going on to, you know, I'm already on my, like, you know,
fifth tour as well.
Yeah. So.
Did you ever consider just buying a house out there?
Yeah. It was run of luck, I think.
Just I mean, mate, I've interviewed a lot of people, and this is one of the most mental runs I've come across. So just one before we go into the tour, you've kind of done punchy dismount tour, and now you've done punchy turret tour. Which did you prefer?
Well, to be fair, we did a lot of both. You know, we only sort of used the vehicles where they were viable. Okay, and we also sort of used them to just get from A to B if we needed to.
Right. Okay.
But we sort of because we were recce soldiers, we could sort of do foot mounted infantry stuff as well. So, but on that tour, we were primarily using the gun armament for its full effect. You know, they were just absolute killing machines, and we were waxing enemy vehicles at 2K, just dropping 30 mil straight in through the windshield. You know, so we were like, great, brilliant, fantastic. And then sort of going to 1 Royal Anglian and then deploying on Herrick 11 and sort of going out there dismounted. At the start, sort of we went out dismounted, even though they were a mechanized unit and had CVRTs. The actual platoon deployed as a dismounted recce platoon, which was all well and good. And we went up to the sort of northern areas of Helmand to do sort of dismounted Fob Keenan and stuff. But I think what happened at the early stages of Herrick 11 is that we got into some punchy stuff, and you know, I remember going into a firefight in the green zone and firing a LASM straight into a PKM position and just turning it into pink mist. And like sort of like they were the opening days of our first tour, and I was like, of my first tour with the Anglians. I'm like, fucking, this ain't changed. This is still punchy as shit. But then they sort of, my boss spoke to me and said, like, when you were out here not long ago, what were you doing? And I said, well, we're in CVRTs, and we were using CVRTs as a gun platform. And basically, the only way to describe it, and here's where the history comes in, we were using the tactic of like Panzer Grenadiers. We were using the vehicles as a fire base to get around, but we were infantry, and we were just jumping on the vehicles. And believe it or not, is most of the time during Herrick 11, we didn't have enough vehicles for all the platoons. So the guys were just jumping on the front decks of the CVRTs as we were cutting around the green zone. So we were like generally like our own Panzer Grenadier platoon, just cutting about, getting into sort of ops. And I sold the idea to the boss about the gun and the use of the CVRTs. The brigade managed to get us a couple of CVRTs, and we deployed out on ops into Nadi Ali. We were redeployed down to Nadi Ali, and we started using this Panzer Grenadier tactic to get around, and it worked. And we were cutting around, and we were causing ambushes. We were taking ground. We were holding that ground with the CVRTs and dismounted infantry and snipers. We were causing all sorts of chaos, and it was a very good tactic to use to get around the IEDs. So we'd sort of punch somewhere before they had the ability to stick an IED field around us. Because a place like Sangin, if you stand in one location for too long, they just completely saturate the area with IEDs. So we were using this mobile Panzer Grenadier tactic to just float around the AO, just causing absolute chaos. And that's when, inadvertently, we did an op back onto Yellow 10, where I did a raid about 4 months earlier. And they were like turning to me going, so what did you do when you were here? I said, well, we use that compound, so don't go in there. That'd be full of IEDs now. Yeah. So we set up in a compound just across the river, and we turned it into a big defensive. And we were there for about a month, just scrapping. We had a CVRT on a ramp looking out over the wall, and we just used to use it as a killing platform. Like every time they used to take us on, we used to just find the BGTI, use the thermal, find them, kill them. And then we used to go out on flanking patrols either side of the PB and just take their fight to the enemy and basically stop them from allowing them to do the IED fields around us by just going out on fighting patrols and just taking the fight to them. And so yeah, it was a really good punchy tour with the Anglians on it's my first tour with the Anglians.
So you just had like the turret of the CVRT poking over the wall?
Yeah. Yeah. Literally just poking over the wall. And there were just stacks of 30 mil casings on the ramp, just like as we'd throw them out the turret, there'd be stacks of them there. And I always remember the day there was a guy, they did an attack on the camp, and they tried to get away on a bike, and the guy was on the bike, and he had these muck around him on the back with his arms around him, and he had an AK slung. And the rules of engagement at the time were basically, if they've got weapons, you can take them down. That were the rules of engagement. So we were all within our right to take them down if they had weapons. And so they were bugging to a new fire location on this bike. And because we were on the CVRT in the BGTI system, it's just, you're not going to miss. I managed to pull it round. I fired my first round, which went in front of the bike. So I got my lay and I pulled it to the right a bit more, fired again, and I waxed the guy on the back. But the guy on the front was still there riding, but the guy had his arms around him still. And you watch this all through the sight. And my mate next to me was Dutch. His name was Dutch, Ricky Holland. And he just turned to me and went, "No fucking way." Because he was watching it on the commander's screen on the left. And he was like, "No fucking way did that just happen." And I was like, mate. But yeah, they were that accurate. So you were never going to miss.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned rules of engagement there. Presumably you're enjoying yourself as a soldier a lot more with the rules of engagement in Afghan compared to the ones that you were on in Iraq.
Yeah, we got more freedom as the ops we were doing as Recce Platoon, because we got folded into what they called the Brigade Recce Platoon at the time. There was a lot of mishmash shapes of how the brigade was being run, and basically they pulled us from up near Sangin down to Nadi Alley, and they made us the Brigade Recce Platoon, and they gave us our own rules of engagement basically. And we were to go out, find and destroy the enemy. Hence why we had this Panzer Grenadier tactic. And we were sent on a lot of ambush operations, lots to do with the platoon sergeant at the time, Keno, who was a very good platoon sergeant, very good soldier all round. But he used to come up with these concepts of, let's go out, let's take over a compound in the middle of the night, throw the family in a room, dig a load of murder holes in the walls and wait for the Taliban to come and then just fuck them up at their own game. And then we used to wait for the rifle companies from other units to go out as bait. And then the Taliban, we used to come out their little cubby holes and we used to cut them down. So it was just us going out and just becoming their worst nightmare.
Right. There's a bit of an anomaly in the timeline here, because you actually have to wait 5 rotations before going out again for your next one, correct? On Herrick 16. So you were back in the UK for
I was in for a while. It was
for
2
like
years.
2 years. So that's a long time for you, mate. How are you adjusting to that? Because you've pretty much been since 2000 and early 2004, and we're now up to 2010, right? So for 6 years you've been in this thing of basically go out, scrap, come home, bit of leave, pre-deployment, back out. So what was that like for you to spend a couple of years in between tours?
It went quick because I did some promotion carders, I did some courses, got down on a few courses and bits and pieces. By the time that had all finished, it was pre-deployment training for Area 16. Yeah. And I was like, it was people said like army life it goes quickly. Like, because when you're always going away, and there was a few exercises here and there. We went off to Canada and other places, but before we knew it, we were back on pre-deployment training for Area 16, which was going to be, we thought was going to be a pretty shit tour. We thought, it's probably going to be winding down now. It's going to be shit. We're going to go out there. There's not much going to happen. Couldn't be more wrong. It was it pretty much, that tour pretty much decimated our platoon, if I won't lie. And all the lads who were on, if any of the lads who listen to this podcast who were on 16 with me in Recce Platoon, like, they will know it pretty much finished us off, that tour. They pretty much wanted to replicate what we did in 11, because we did so well on 11. They wanted us to replicate what we did as the brigade's pit bulls. However, the situation had changed. The enemy become more wise, and we stretched ourselves too thin. Also, the intelligence was really fucking bad by that point. So there were a lot of ops we went on. A lot of successes. We sort of go, it's the same sort of tactic as we did before. Go out, take over compounds, ambush the enemy. And the 2-2 SAS guys started getting in on it as well. So a lot of the stuff we did, we had a couple of 2-2 guys with us. So it become known of what we were doing. And even the SF wanted a bit of the action. So we had some good successes in the early parts of the tour, very kinetic scraps in Daddy Alley. However, my mental state for stuff started to deteriorate, not in the fact of the war fighting, but how the British Army was handling stuff. And our CO at the time made it quite clear that we were to be more restricted of how we fought the war. And what we were to do when we were to fire. And they called it courageous restraint. However, if you're in a gunfight and you've got the ability to kill the enemy, you'd use that ability to kill them. And I remember one of the early firefights we had, we were in a compound and we were taking fire, and I located the PKM that was rattling the rooftop, which me and a couple of lads were on, and I fired a LASM at it. And I got told off because firing a LASM was apparently not courageous restraint. Now, I'm not being funny. If they're behind a wall, which is taking 7.62 and 5.56, they're decimating our rooftop, yet I can't do fuck all to them with a sharpshooter rifle, then I'm going to rely on a LASM to punch a hole through that wall and kill them. But yet, so I got a big bollocking and almost got sent home.
Fucking hell.
Because I'd fired this, and they issued us with these 66s. So if they didn't want us to use them, why issue them? So I got basically reprimanded for firing a 66 into an enemy position. And yeah, so in my head, I was thinking, well, what do you want me to do? Kill the fucking enemy or not? So yeah, it become a bit of a battleground in my head about where things were going with the war fighting side of things. But we were going out on this tour. We were going out. We were killing the enemy. We were ambushing them. We were taking them down. We were doing what we were meant to do. So in the end, I was ticking over. But we were taking casualties. The platoon started taking casualties. Guys started getting hit. Started getting casualties out. Luckily, no deaths, but gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds, IEDs. So we started to take a toll on us as well as, and Herrick 11, we didn't sustain a single casualty, and we decimated them. So it was a bitter pill to swallow when you're going on a tour doing the same sort of tactics, but you're now taking casualties as well. And then sort of midway through the tour, sort of July time, we were sent up to on an op into Goresh Valley, which we all know Goresh Valley very well. We're going to call it the Valley of Death. And we were sent in an op with the Grand Guards to sweep an area and defend an area. However, bad intelligence, we dropped straight on top of a Taliban training ground. And then we ended up getting cut off for 10 days, just scrapping at close quarter fight. And when we say, like, there was no more than sometimes 4 or 5 meters in front of us, yards at this, and we were just literally, it was a bloodbath. We took casualties. We killed a hell of a lot of them. And yeah, I got wounded. And yeah, it was a bad day in the office, and that pretty much finished off our platoon after that. When you get ambushed and the guys left and right of you get dropped and you're the only one still standing, and you're sort of thinking, how am I fucking still standing? That PKM just whacks 2 of my 8s and I'm still standing here. So yeah, it got that started to take toll on us. And these guys were veterans. These guys had done 4 or 5 tours as well, and these guys had seen some shit. But it's getting. I always remember. And the same guy who was in the turret with me when I got that guy on the motorbike, Ricky Holland, he got shot in his side plate and underneath his arm, across under there, by this PKM burst, as well as Woz, who got shot through the arm. And I remember firing back at this enemy position, looking down and going, "You all right?" And he told me, "I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. I've got a family, man." And sort of that hits you when a guy who was as solid as a rock through other tours, and you would like trust in any firefight, turns around to you with his eyes wide open, with a bullet hole in his body armor and underneath his sleeve, and you're just like, he's just looking at you going, "I can't do this anymore." It's just yeah. I think that's when the crack started to show in people.
Is that action on the Taliban training area? Is that where you were awarded? For where you were awarded the military cross?
Yeah. So yeah, we went to do an ambush on a known enemy firing position. So we sort of crept out at night time, laid up just short of this firing position. Now, in the past, the Taliban had never been on their firing positions. They always sort of withdraw, go away, regroup, and then come back. What we learned from the hard way on this op was they were standing their ground. They were digging in and they were standing their ground. And so when the dawn come and they popped their heads up, they were next to us. They were literally meters away from us. And it just all kicked off. There was short range firefight, grenades coming over the walls, grenades going back over the walls, shouts. You could hear them shouting at us. We were shouting at them. And so it just turned into absolute carnage. And I was at the flank with the GPMG gunner because I had a sharpshooter rifle. He had a GPMG. There was nothing really we could do at that range other than sort of like fire into the enemy position at close range. But there was a doorway in front of me. And I looked at Ant, and who was the GPMG gunner. I said, I'm going through. And he said, don't go through. And I went, I'm going through. I can't sit here. And I sort of went through this doorway. But the problem was I had a 66 on my back, because even though I got fucking thrashed for firing at 66, I went, I'm fucking taking one. They do damage. I'm taking it with me. And I got stuck in the doorway, and I was like, you fucking cunt. And I sort of pushed my way through, managed to sort of unheroically push my way through this doorway and managed to get through. And as I sort of looked up, the guy was there, and he was just looking at me bright-eyed like, fuck. And we both sort of like lifted our weapons at the same time, and I managed to like sort of snap off 3 or 4 rounds in the sharpshooter rifle at close range, and he sort of like took a hit in the side and fell back through. And I sort of pushed in and passed, and then into the compound where they were all sort of gangling around, and yeah, it all got a bit messy. And then, sort of pushed them out, basically pushed them out this compound. And, a mate of mine, Steve-O, come running up behind. And then by that time I'd taken frag in the shoulder, and, we managed to push through and clear the remainder of the positions. But I look back on that. So this is where it becomes a bit. I look back on that action, and I think nothing I did during that day was any different from what anyone else did during that tour. I see guys on that tour, like these guys were now by this time pure hardened veterans. They'd been on numerous tours, from anything from Herrick 6, Telics, some of the hardest scraps that people could ever have been on. These were hardened veterans within Recce Platoon. Now, these guys were guys that would run at machine guns, run into compounds, IEDs would go off next to them, and they would fucking shake it off. They were absolute fucking heroes, every single one of them. And what really done me about that tour was then they to single me out and say, you're getting an MC. I said, why? Why am I getting it? And I remember being in the CO's office after the tour going, why are you giving me an MC? And he said, well, because of what you did at Goresh. So I didn't do anything. Everyone else did something. I've seen blokes get chopped up by machine guns. I've seen blokes charge machine guns. I've seen guys like, there was a lad that got shot in the back. Rather than be Kazivacked out, walked out to the Pedro. Like literally, Stanners like got shot through the back and walked to the Pedro because he didn't want to be a burden and didn't want to be like a one of them blokes who lays in a stretcher and gets carried out during a running firefight. And I was just like, there's lads like that who've got fuck all. And I just felt a little bit. It didn't sit well with me. And it wasn't till Keno and the boss pulled me in. Keno being my platoon sergeant, and the boss pulling me into the office and saying, "Right, listen, this MC isn't for that. This MC is for fucking everything you've been on, everything you've done, and also this MC is not just for you; it's for the platoon, for everything they did on that tour and in that valley. Go and take it." And that's the only way I could take it, because they told me to go and take it that way.
Everything you've said about those blokes there, and obviously combining this with what you know about history, previous generations of warriors, because like what you've described there, that's warriors, right? In a nutshell, shitburst. How do you feel when you hear people, maybe you see on social media or people chat now and then, you get the, oh, that generation today couldn't do what they did back then, and that kind of thing. Like, given what you've seen and who you've served with and what you've done yourself.
Well, they said that to us on Telic 4. So let's go back all the way to the beginning. So I always remember they called us the PlayStation generation when we went on Telic 4. But one PWRR went on Telic 4 as the PlayStation generation and threw it out the park. They walked away with 2 deaths, casualties, but did what they were meant to do. All these young lads who people donated them to the sort of PlayStation generation. I believe young lads who are determined, who want to be there, because I've seen guys who've not wanted to be there and they are on no use to no man nor beast. But guys who want to be there, who want to get stuck in, I don't care if it's back then or now. If you want to be there and you want to fight, them guys will fight. They will fight for their country. And it's that rare few people that become the ones that stand out amongst the rest as the guys who will run at machine guns, who will throw grenades into position, who will fix bayonet and charge into the next field. I believe they still exist. I don't believe they're not around. They are here. It's not for everybody. It's for the volunteer who wants to go out, who wants to fix his bayonet and charge into the next position.
Mate, that's powerful. Got to be honest, I have no idea how to transition from that to the next part of the thing, mate. That's fucking, mate, I'm fucking roused, honestly. And mate, I could talk about your tours all day, but I also want to talk to you about what you're doing now. I think you mentioned it was kind of part of your, I don't know if you want to use the term, healing process, transition process.
Yeah, so my healing. So obviously we said, like, my early days in the army, back-to-back tours, and then obviously going into doing my last tour, which was Herrick 16, which was a funky tour as well. I think the only way I've sort of got through that, I don't think, I mean, being truthful to the people who listen to this podcast, I was medically discharged from the army, but I was medically discharged from the army with combat addiction. So it's a thing, apparently, and that's why I was kicked out. But I was kicked out. No. Basically, I become too much of a burden on the army, apparently. But they decided that I would be leaving with a war pension, and they would send me on my way with full honours and say, "You've done your time, big boy. Well done for everything you've done. Here's a pension. Goodbye." Now, wasn't my choice. That was their choice. But the sort of reasons for that was I wasn't coping in normal army barrack life. I just wasn't. I did do some time up at Catterick, with the permanent staff and the instructors, but that was great, and I really enjoyed that. And it was lovely to sort of bring guys on as a next future infantry soldiers and help them transition into the fact that they would go on and do things, from boys to men. which was great, and I really enjoyed it. I did 3 years up there, loved it. However, when I got back, I really struggled. To fit into the army. You know, when I've got guys telling me how to be a soldier who've never been on tour, I didn't fit in, and I think the army noticed that. And you know, I wasn't a bad soldier. I mean, I got long service good conduct. If I, didn't get caught for anything, but I think people who, knew that I wasn't going to fit in unless we were going to go out scrapping, and that's when it all comes ahead that they turn around and said, "Enough's enough, big boy, you're off." So, and I think I've never had PTSD. And I think one of the main reasons for that is my external hobbies, which is the history, the vehicles. I'm very much into like restoring World War II vehicles. I do my own ones as well as I do commissions for other people. And I think taking that, focusing on it, as well as the historical part and the fascination into history, I do a little bit of living history and concepts and collections.
Can you explain what that is, mate? Sorry.
Yeah, so basically, I do sort of I do living history, which is World War II living history. Now, it's not. I don't class it as reenacting. Reenacting is a little bit different, a bit more laxed. You know, they do these rats battles and stuff, which I think's crap. I don't like it. But I do the more
living history. To get stuck in there, mate.
yeah, but they're all weird and they do unsafe stuff. And
bodies everywhere, mate.
Yeah, Loz, put the bayonet down. No, die. but I do, and there's a great group of lads I do it with, and they're very young, very keen, and they love learning history, and basically we like to do it as authentic as possible. And we recently did a display for the 156 Parachute Battalion Medium Machine Gun Platoon, and anyone knows their history. 156 Para were one of the para battalions that took some of the heaviest casualties on Market Garden during the Arnhem operation, and so we recreated their MMG platoon, which was pretty much decimated. So we did that to a very high standard, and all the good kit, all the good guns, and basically it was just a photo shoot documenting the historical accuracies of this, which is what we like to do. And I like putting my focus into that. I like bringing sort of the accuracies of historical content out to people. It's like my niche, I'd say. It gives me good focus, gives me something to research, and that's probably the biggest thing is it. You have to research, and it's going through documents, going through photos, going through people's experiences, and this is where it sort of links into my experiences, that you can read a guy's personal account of the battle and go, fucking hell, I did something like that. Well, I did a bit of that, and I think that gives me closure, knowing that actually I have done what these warriors have done in the past. I mean, I was never in the Second World War and never experienced the hardships they experienced, but I've had my own hardships and I've had my own experiences, and some of them are pretty similar. I haven't gone up against Tiger tanks and stuff like that because them blokes have balls of steel, but I've had my own wars and I've had my own battles, and it's nice that I can now have a bit of closure and go, no, I've done my bit. I've done my bit as a warrior. That's enough for me. I'm just going to learn about these guys who did it in the past and how ally they were, and then bring that to life in an impression. And so I collect the gear that they had, all the original equipment, all the original uniforms, and I put an impression together and I document it, take photos and portray it, and then show a little bit of history, a bit of knowledge about what they used to carry and stuff like that.
Who do you find is there like a demographic that's particularly receptive to that kind of thing of what you're imparting?
Yeah, it's definitely a niche scene of people. It's a clique, as I like to call them. But the historical nuts who like all that. But I find it's also a bit tainted. There are awful lot of what I call closet waltz that do it. People who wanted to join the army but never joined the army, but putting on a reenactor's uniform is closer to the army than they're ever going to get. I find there's a hell of a lot of that, but they justify it through reenacting. But also there are a lot of people who do it for the right reasons. So it is a very much a mismatch, and it can be a frustrating hobby, especially when you come across more of the guys and girls that do it for ego and a little bit of social media content, rather than actually, I'm doing it because I really want to learn about what these guys went through back in the day. How uncomfortable they must have been in that kit and equipment. Why did they carry that kit and equipment that way? What did they carry in their kit? There's a lot of people who do that, but then there's also people who don't really give a fuck. They just want to wear the kit and pretend to be a soldier, which is fucking infuriating.
Were you a bit of a kit pest when you were in the army?
Yes.
But go on, talk us through, mate. I love battlefield passion, mate. Let's hear it. What was the sketch, mate?
So my kit pest was like how better could I carry my equipment in a way that would make me more efficient to fight. And my kit, if anyone goes through my photos of tours, like how my kit is different on each tour, because each tour I was learning something new. So by the time I got to my last tour, I'm totally unrecognizable to what I look like. I'm like, well, the kit changed generally anyway. But if you look, I'm not wearing, only on my first Iraq tours, I'm sort of wearing the basic DPM desert. But by the time I'm getting to Afghan, it's a mixed match of jungles, MTP, that the alley sort of, we're going into the green zone, I'm going to wear a jungle shirt. It's sort of, it changed, and you sort of see the freedom of action you're getting in the kit and equipment, which is really goes on to the historical side as well, because if you look at how the war went on so let's say, for instance, the Second World War, the rigid British Army of the BEF in 1940 with their gas capes and respirators on their fronts, and that kit and how they all looked like regimented and smart, going all the way to 1945 when they were crossing the Rhine and they're wearing, windproof smocks and Denison smocks in normal infantry divisions, and they're looking gnarly as fuck because they're just like, right, webbing's a little bit more slack. We're not going to carry that. We're not going to carry this. It's the same evolution, and you can sort of match that together between, Iraq and Afghanistan and the sort of Second World War.
Yes, that's the evolution of the veteran. And I think one of the great things about, I think one of the call it problem with Iraq is quite often people were operating out of big bases where the hierarchy was. You've got a lot of people with time on their hands who aren't getting off the ground and just want to take it out on your people. Whereas you get 12 of you in a fucking compound in the middle of the green zone, there's a lot more freedom of let's call it freedom of expression, not for reasons of I just want to be different. Now that's part of it. Everyone wants to look fucking alley, but it's also like you said, there's always purpose behind it. And I think that's one of the things that'd be quite frustrating, especially in infantry, when you've got these rules being imposed by someone who's, in an air-conditioned office. That it's like, well, yeah, but the reason that these lads on the ground are doing this stuff is because it's helping them to be a better soldier. It's helping them to do the job. It's helping them to do the job better. Is there anything else you want to say about that stuff? Because I do have a few questions about your service. Unless there's anything else you want to say about that kind of living history side of things.
No, I think that's covered it. And the living history it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's I even at the beginning thought that it was shit, and I thought they were all gopping individuals. But it wasn't until I met a mate of mine locally who was also into military vehicles like me, and he's a serving, he's now an RSM, but he was a serving Air Medical Regiment member, done Black Serpent, worked with the SF, and that he said, "Oh, come along and doing a reenactment with us." And I went along, and I actually enjoyed it. It was like with guys who had similar experiences. You had a lot of Gulf War veterans and blah blah blah. So and you could chut shit, and you had the banter you didn't have sort of in Civvy Street that you have in the army. So yeah, it's hit and miss. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and also it's not everything about that hobby is my cup of tea. I don't like saying I like classing myself as more of elitist, but I am. And I think if you're not an elitist, then you're not doing it right. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like, look, man, when I've been out to Normandy and the anniversaries and stuff, and you see these reconditioned vehicles and everything, it's fucking amazing, you know. So I'm all for it, mate. I think it'd be awesome if more veterans got into it as well. I think that we, because we all enjoy looking at them. I know that. So,
Yeah.
So it sounds like when you went out on Telic 4 and you were like, I don't want to be. Let's be honest. I've always kind of used to use the term myself, a human sandbag, in a lot of the ways. And then it sounds like over your tours, you got a bit more autonomy, and not just you. It sounds like the army as a whole on some of these tours, and battle groups will get more autonomy, and then your companies will get it, and then your platoons will get it, all the way down to the blokes. And then it sounds like towards the end that started to get pulled back again with these things like this. It's absolutely bananas that someone would be reprimanded for using the LASM when someone's shooting them with PKM. So it sounds like it almost went full circle in a way that if we want to use the broadly defined term, the war on terror, that you could put Afghan and Iraq in. Would you agree with that? Have I read that?
Oh, no, I 100% agree with it. And I think as well what it was is because I think the British Army knew it was becoming to wind down. They wanted to become more soft in the way they did stuff. But the problem is that the battle space dictated what was going on, and the battle space wasn't ready for that. The battle space was very kinetic still, and the British Army wanting to go full, circle, like you said, and start becoming soft approach, it wasn't going to work. And we learned that very quickly on that tour. But, it might have happened on later tours, but certainly not on Herrick 16 did that happen for us. That soft approach we started with early in the tour soon disappeared, and I was almost going to get sent home from what I did on that LASM, from starting at the tour, almost going to get sent home to ending the tour, winning an MC. There's two extremes there that show that actually what the army dictated we should do never lasts.
Right.
Because the situation changes. And although they wanted to make it softer and the rules of engagement more harsh, the enemy dictates what happens there. And if your blokes are getting killed and shot because you're trying to have a soft approach, yeah, something's got to give.
Well, I think the other thing as well is even though they're different actions, one's firing LASM, one's going through a door and, getting amongst it. That is both actually, it's the same thing. It's what do I need to do to resolve this situation?
Yeah.
And so my books, it's exactly the same thing. And the person who reacts to one, you need that person to be able to react to the other as well. And I think trying to breed or discipline that out of people is very dangerous. And it kind of brings me on to my point about one of the guests we've had on the podcast, Frank Ledwidge. He's written a couple of fantastic books about Op Telic, Op Telic and Op Herrick. Losing Small Wars and Investment in Blood. Recommend them, mate. They're fantastic. And one of his kind of points was that basically what both of those tours became about was limiting, like staying out on the ground so that we could still say that we're there with the Americans, etc. But at the same time, trying to limit casualties. But by trying to do that, you quite often surrender the initiative, which can itself lead to more casualties. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree that our platoon was very much like an evidence piece for that. You've got a hardened veteran platoon of reconnaissance soldiers dumped into a battle space, restricted by their rules of engagement, who start to become decimated in a surrounded catastrophic operation. And when you're told like limit the amount of ammunition you expend, don't fire LASMs, try not to call in air support, but you're cut off and surrounded and you're fighting at close quarters. What do you want? What do you want the guys to survive? How do you keep your guys alive? Well, you give them what they need to survive, and that is the right rules of engagement, the right support. Or do you tell them, actually, we're going to be more softer on this, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do that? I totally agree. I think the whole mindset was, let's avoid the casualties by making things softer, but actually it worked the other way around and made things a little bit more worse than it should have done.
You mentioned the PWRR's history. Obviously, a lot of that is recorded on the colours, battle honours, and such. We still, we've awarded, yourself military cross. We've had Victoria Crosses, Iraq and Afghanistan. So, everybody knows really that both were wars, and they might have gone up and down and things like that. And something that I've kind of just hit recently. Really. I think it was the BT MC. I forget which regiment. I think it was 16 Air Assault. I forget which battalion. And I think he had read an article of his basically talking about why isn't Helmand Province and Basra, like Southern Iraq, a battle honor? Because there's a battle honor for Telic 1 for Al Basra, I think it is, but there isn't one obviously for all the Helmand and things like that. What's your kind of opinion on that? Do you think that these operations, obviously they're not as specific as say a SOM, or well, actually you can make an argument there because the SOM's really a campaign rather than a battle. But what's your kind of opinion on whether these, your Telic and Herrick should be a regimental battle honor?
Yep, absolutely agree. It should be. There's a lot of guys who put a lot, like me, 3 tours in each place. There's a lot of guys that invested into them campaigns, and then not to be recognised on a regimental standard is a crime in my eyes. Because how do you remember the sacrifice of them people in your regiment if they're not on the flags that you carry? And it baffles me why regiments that served in both Telic and Herrick don't have that on their standards. It really does. And I think this was asked years and years ago. Why is this not a thing? Why have we not got these operations which took up a sizable amount of our time and a sizable amount of casualties, that we're not recognizing them on our standards? And I seriously think it's a crime that we're not. And I think that we should. Every unit that served in them areas should have them on their standards.
And just for a bit of context for listeners as well, because people, it's a counterinsurgency rather, or the Malaya counterinsurgency is a battle honor for several regiments, so that is precedent for having them. I just find it quite shocking, mate. But I think you put it the right way. To be honest, it's more than shocking. It's really kind of a crime. But mate, unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our time. I do have a final question for you when we wrap up. Before that, I just want to really thank you for coming on, mate. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I know the listeners will do too. I'll put links down in the show notes where everybody can come and find you, see what you're up to with the living history and so forth. But yeah, mate, just want to say, thanks for your time, and just hand the floor over to you, mate. If there's anything that's on your mind, anything you want to get off your chest, mate, now's the time.
No, it's just thank you for inviting me on. It's been nice to actually talk about some stuff, and it's not often guys in veterans get together and talk about things they've done and where they've been. And I always, for the guys out there who don't talk, it's always better to talk and get amongst guys who they don't have to have served with you or in your units, but have served and know what you went through, even if they're in other units. And I think it's always good to talk. And I know not enough lads are doing it at the moment. Which is quite sad. So if you are out there and you're not talking, go find someone to talk to and talk about this stuff. Don't keep it bottled up.
All right, mate. Final question: would you do it all again?
I would do it in a heartbeat. Couldn't hold me back.